they come out with a flimsy excuse by saying it's the product of the union, the law. We know. We've been outside the law for 12 months. The law says we must.
Joining us is Kim Scipes. Kim is a professor and longtime expert and writer on AFL-CIO international policies. And he is going to talk about a new court document from the Solidarity Center, which is important to what it's been doing and what's happening today in the United States. So welcome to our show, Kim.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here, Steve.
The Trump administration and Musk have basically shut down the operating budget of the Solidarity Center, and it led the executive director, Shawna Bader-Blau of the Solidarity Center, to file a legal statement about why the Solidarity Center should be continuing to operate and continue to get funding from the U.S. government. So this statement, I think, or the filing by the AFL-CIO Solidarity Center director, are you surprised about it? Because it seems like it's opened up a whole can of worms for the AFL-CIO, but what are they really doing? What are they about?
One of the things about this is that you have to understand, this is not the whole AFL-CIO. It's a very narrow, top-level foreign policy leaders. And like I say, they've been carrying this foreign policy out for over 120 years. And to this date, they have never given an honest report to their members about this foreign policy, what they're doing.
Isn't it the case that they don't want to give a report? I know in my union, the CWA, remember the News Guild, they don't want to discuss it. They don't want to report on it. Even though they have hundreds of people on the staff of the AFL Solidarity Center, there's never made a report what they're doing, what countries are involved in, and aren't these people who work for the AFL-CIO Solidarity Center really government agents in the sense that their salaries are paid for by the government, and they have to go through a process of hiring in which the government is involved because it operates as an appendage of the U.S. government.
Yeah, that's the point made, Steve, is that the AFL claims it's part of the labor movement when in reality it's not. You're right. They are hired by the U.S. government. They work for the U.S. government. Their funds are paid by the U.S. government. And yet the foreign policy leadership in the AFL-CIO claims them as part of the labor movement. Now, what makes this new filing so important? The Solidarity Center gets over half of its budget from the National Endowment for Democracy. So they're in over 100 countries around the world. They're claiming to be helping freedom and democracy. In reality, they're not promoting democracy as you and I know it, the one person, one vote, the thing that most Americans understand. If you're being affected by something, you get to vote. They're not promoting that type of democracy. The NED has been doing all this stuff. The Solidarity Center has been part of it. And now, under Trump decided to cut off all the funding to the National Endowment for Democracy. All right. Then the NED has filed a lawsuit in the federal district court in New York. But one of the things that's real interesting is that they took a statement from Shawna Bader-Blau, who is the executive director of the NED, and she gave a report to the court that she's never given, or she or anyone else has ever given to union members, talking about that their foreign policy has gone back to the 1890s, like I said, that it's funded by the United States, that over 50% of their budget comes from the National Endowment Democracy through the State Department, through NED. The other, by the way, is the U.S. Agency for International Development. That's a parallel institute. And that they've been working around the world. And she we thought they were only in 60 plus countries. She concludes over 70. And in this document, she admits that, she doesn't really say a whole lot as far as detail. It's very vague. She makes these vague claims. She provides no evidence for their work. But what we see is they're operating in a number of countries around the world, none of which she describes what they're doing, why they're there, who they're working with, for what trade union purposes. And that this has been more information than we've had ever from the AFL-CIO. So the importance of this, I think, is quite serious, and it's something now. It's not just outside researchers. I mean, even though we're in the labor movement, we're considered outsiders. It's not just something the outsiders are talking about, but she's now confirmed this stuff. So, for example, they get something like 52% of their annual budget comes from NED. Now, what she doesn't say, but what I know is another 40% comes from the U.S. Agency for International Development. But altogether, she's talking about an annual budget of approximately $78 million that has never been explained. There's never been any detailed reporting on it. It's behind the backs of members. It's operating in our name, and she's confirmed what a lot of us who've been writing and acting against this stuff have been claiming. So it's a quite, I think, an important document.
And they say that they have 26 field offices, or they're going to have to close. And she says that they are going to have to declare bankruptcy if they don't get this money.
Well, exactly. And it brings the point that their operations are almost totally funded by the US government. It's not supported by the labor movement. This is not work that has been approved by the labor movement through any of our processes. It's never been reported, it's never been detailed, and what we're finding out is that it's almost all coming from the US government. And now that Trump's cut it off, this whole project, which they're so very proud of, and like I say, has gone on for over 120 years, is about to be shut down.
And isn't this a part and parcel of corporate unionism, business unionism? I mean, the formation of the AFL-CIO, in fact, was the formation of a pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist trade union federation with the witch hunts against leftists and communists in the United States, and the establishment of a union federation, which said they wanted to be in partnership with the bosses, with the capitalists in this country, and to act as an arm of U.S. imperialism around the world. Wasn't that the foundation of the AFL-CIO?
Largely, I mean, it's a little more complex than that, and I won't go into that here. I've done it in a lot of my writings, but yes, it's been a very pro-capitalist operation. Some of us think that the U.S. is the center of a U.S. empire, and that the top leaders in the labor movement believe that the U.S. should run the world. The U.S. has dominated the world since 1945, especially after the Soviet Union fell. That domination became more transparent. But the U.S. has been not acting as a regular country, but they have an empire, and that's what I think you see Trump is trying to do, is preserve that empire. But the top leaders of AFL-CIO, without any debate, any discussion, anything like that, have supported that unequivocally. And as we know, they've helped work, even though they're supposed to be helping workers. We know they've overthrown democratically elected governments. We know they've supported a number of dictatorships around the world. We know they've supported reactionary labor movements against progressive labor movements. All this has been documented
Well,
between my book and Shirky's book.
well,
You
well,
get a
all,
pretty clear view of that.
well, also they're supporting the genocide in Gaza. The AFL-CIO leadership, most of them say that they're Zionist. They support Zionism, and they support military aid, more bombs and weapons to Israel to commit genocide. I mean, this internationalism of the AFL-CIO in relationship to both Israel and the genocide going on, but also uh, defending being an appendage of the U.S. government in its international operations. Doesn't that really show that they're in reality they're not an independent trade union movement? They're an appendage of U.S. government and U.S. imperialism.
Well, I think it's a little more complex than that, in that the labor movement, it's these top level leaders supposedly acting for all of us, but in
We're
reality
talking
only
about Liz
themselves.
Schuler, who was on the board of directors of the National Endowment for Democracy.
She was, and now she's president of the AFL-CIO. Redmond was also on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy. Other people, folks might know, or folks like Henry Kissinger was on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy. Yes, this whole operation is tied in together very much with the highest levels of the U.S. Well, I would call it in the empire. Others would call it the highest U.S. foreign policy apparatus. They're
Well, what is
definitely
Trump?
included in
What
it.
does Trump want to do? Because he says now, and Musk, that basically, first of all, he said that these people were opposed to Trump, that the National Endowment for Democracy were criticizing Trump and his agents. But you think that they're getting rid of the soft hand of, and saying, let's just invade, let's just take over using the military. We don't need any of these so-called reform programs or uh, role of the AFL-CIO internationally, like in the Philippines or in Thailand. They're big in Thailand. They were big in Ukraine. I mean,
Yeah,
the AFL-CIO was in favor of privatizing Ukraine. They supported union officials in Ukraine who were for the right wing or the European oligarchs or American oligarchs to take over Ukraine instead of the Russian oligarchs. So it seems that in relationship to privatization, which the AFL-CIO says they're against, they're actually supporting privatization around the world through the Solidarity Center.
absolutely, absolutely. By the way, one of the things about the Ukraine that's real interesting, back in 2014, right after the so-called Maidan revolution, there was a fire in the trade union Congress house. I forget the exact name, but
Odessa, yeah,
it. I'm sorry.
Odessa, you're talking about.
Yeah, in Odessa, and it was put on fire, and then there were something like 50 people that were burned to death there. I have never seen. Normally, when something like that happens, the AFL-CIO will put out a solidarity statement or something like this. I've never been able to find any response into the fact that the trade union center house was burned down and these people were trapped in there and burned to death. So there's a lot of involvement in Ukraine that still hasn't come out, but they definitely were involved there. But they've been involved in all kinds of places: Armenia, Kazakhstan, Thailand, like you say, the Philippines. We've got a few.
South Africa, they
Oh,
were
certainly.
involved in supporting the apartheid regime. They actually financed Chief Buthelezi,
Yes.
gave him $1 million, over $1 million, and he was attacking and murdering trade unionists in South Africa, organizing in Kosato. And he was given an award, Labor Man of the
Yes.
Year, the Meany Award, by the AFL-CIO, at the same time that he was attacking trade unions in South Africa and supported the apartheid regime. He supported Bantustan states in
Yeah,
South Africa.
and now, and this is what's very interesting in this very document that Bader-Blau just filed in support of the NED. She claims that the AFL-CIO was helping to end apartheid. Well, it was only after American trade unions revolted from the bottom that they shifted their position. But you're absolutely right. The stuff on Buthelezi in particular is particularly obnoxious, and we've got this.
And
I've
Chile,
got
there was a commemoration of the coup in Chile, which the United States AFL-CIO was involved in overthrowing the Allende government and supporting Pinochet, supporting
yeah.
privatization of the Chilean economy. It seems like the policy of U.S. imperialism, they were an appendage to, and even in Mexico, the AFL-CIO was involved in attacking Ford workers in Mexico. They organized goons to attack a militant union group at the Ford Assembly plant in Mexico City. One worker was killed. They've never been held accountable for that, for
Right.
their role in the Mexican working class. It seems they have a pretty sordid, bloody history in Brazil and Argentina, where there are military coups and thousands of trade unions were killed, murdered, kidnapped at Ford, other companies, Mercedes. I mean, the AFL-CIO has never been held accountable for this. I mean, in fact, most, as you say, AFL-CIO members have no knowledge of the role of the AFL-CIO. Why is that? I mean, it seems like it's has been a non-issue in the AFL-CIO.
Well, unfortunately, I think you're right. I mean, I think this gets to the fact that the type of democracy the NED is pushing around the world. So this is like I say, it's not the type most Americans think of. It's a constrained democracy. Leaders get to decide the width of the discussion or who can run for office or whatever, and then they let the peons vote or whatever within that constraint. They've done that in the American labor movement. This should not, all of this stuff should not exist. It's a very attack on labor democracy. Like I said, I use the example from the 2005 Chicago Convention where they changed the resolution supported by 1/6 of the entire AFL-CIO. They changed it from condemning its foreign policy to one supporting it. They don't want these debates. They don't want people to know about this. They want people to be, dumb and stupid and remain that way. And so what we've been trying to do in LaPayo is to challenge that, to get the ideas out, to present this history and say, look, don't believe us, do your own research. But here's some of the things that we've found. Here's sharing it. Here's this book. There's that book. And in fact, there's a brand new, by the way, there's a brand new dissertation, a PhD dissertation that came out just last year. And it's called Making Democracy Safe for Empire. And it's about the NED and about the U.S. Agency for International Development. And if you want to read this, all you have to do is go to Google, put in Making Democracy Safe for Empire, and what it will take you to is this dissertation by Dr. Ben Arthur Thompson, who I don't know, but I've read his dissertation. It's amazing. I've got to go back. There's a lot of stuff in it.
Well, one of the things that the executive director says, Shawna Bader-Blau, is that this is an existential threat. The shutdown of all the funding of the Solidarity Center. Well, I mean, it seems like the labor movement itself in the United States faces an existential threat with the attack on NLRB, with the termination of contracts by the Trump government of the federal employees, by the plan of Project 2025, which is basically for the privatization of all public services, public education, and for the elimination of unions, to set up company unions. I mean, it seems like that's an existential threat, but it seems like for these top union officials, there is no mass mobilization of labor against this existential threat facing the working class in this country or organized labor.
You're absolutely right, Steve. I mean, I went to the AFL-CIO website. It says aflcio.org. And what they're doing, so they've got over 10 million members, and what they're telling them is call your congressional representative. That's all they want to see, and they've not been. Think about it. Where has the AFL-CIO been? They have not spoken out against Trump's attacks on the labor movement. They have not, like you say, they've not condemned Trump's attack on the National Labor Relations Board, or they haven't even condemned the attacks on federal unions.
Well, I mean, I think they have made statements, press release statements on these issues. But, making a press release statement and mobilizing and educating the rank and file about even Project 2025 hasn't happened by the AFL-CIO. And there's no call for a massive march, mobilization of millions of workers. If the threat of Trump and these fascists who run the government is an existential threat to labor, as they say, it's an existential threat to the funding of the Solidarity Center. Where is the mobilization? Where are the mass marches? Where are the general strikes, which workers in other countries have had against frontal attacks on the working class? In Argentina, for example, with Milei, the CGT, which is the Conservative Trade Union Federation, like the AFL-CIO, has called for general strikes. Here, complete silence as far as mass action by the working class.
Right. Well, see, the thing is, Steve, I believe the leaders of the AFL-CIO, the top level leaders, are afraid of their members. They're afraid of workers. They don't want us to know what's going on because we can think. Now, we may not, each one of us might not be a rocket scientist, but when you get a group of workers together and talk things out, give them accurate information, talk things out, you generally find they come up with some pretty damn good thinking. And it's an insult It's an assault on the labor movement. What the so-called labor leaders are doing, they're not present. They're not standing up. They're not fighting Trump. At best, they issue some mealy mouth press releases. Please call your congressman. Well, most of the congressmen are not standing up anyway, but that's not the way you should go. I agree with you. We should be mobilizing. We should be educating our people. We should be going out and calling people into the streets. They're
Well,
missing. They're missing in action, and it's not a
one of the
mistake.
key issues is the trade war now, uh, which has been going on for some time. It didn't start with Trump.
Right.
The Democrats have sanctions on and trade war, China, trade war against sanctions on Cuba, sanctions on Venezuela, sanctions on Iran, sanctions on Russia. So there have been trade wars and sanctions on many, many countries. But what has happened now with the Trump administration is Liberation Day or destruction of the world economy. I mean, that's destruction of the world economy. Looks like it with the stock market. But the fact of the matter is, the plan is to pit American workers against Mexican workers against American workers, against Canadian workers, against Chinese workers. Shouldn't the labor movement be uniting with workers in Mexico and Canada against trade war, against the capitalists and the multinationals who basically want to destroy the labor movement?
Absolutely. I mean, I think global labor solidarity is the only way forward. Mexican workers are not a threat to American workers. Chinese workers are not a threat to American workers. The people making these decisions, and by the way, the American industrial economy was just gutted out in the 80s. I mean, if you want to think of a visual representation, go back to Michael Moore's brilliant film Roger and Me. Now, the limitation of that was he only focused on Flint like it was an aberration. In reality, it was a good example of what was going on because it happened all across the industrial belt that's now known as the Rust Belt. That's where I live in northern Indiana, and it's still going on. And
Well,
those decisions.
wasn't that a
Wait a minute, Steve.
bipartisan?
Wait a minute, just a second. The point I want to make, though, is that the decision to close down American factories and ship overseas to China or Vietnam or Mexico or wherever was not made by workers, either there or here. It was made by senior corporate management with the support of the United States government under both Democrats and Republicans.
And the Democrats and Republicans both passed NAFTA, uh,
Yep,
even the USMCA, which the AFL-CIO said was a great agreement. These were corporate trade agreements and
absolutely.
allowed for the export of capital. And the trade war is a direct result of the fact that the United States is no longer competitive because they've deindustrialized. American capitalists wanted to make more profits first by going to the South, then to go to Mexico, and now to go to Asia. So to
Yep,
blame these other countries, well, there's capitalists right here, the billionaires right here, the corporations, the billionaires, who are the ones that made the decision to outsource. And yet they're blaming
absolutely.
China, they're blaming Mexico, they're blaming Canada. I mean, it's made by the capitalist billionaires right in the United States. So this effort to divert and deflect
Yes.
accountability seems like it's pretty apparent since they made the decision to deindustrialize. Am I getting it
Absolutely,
wrong?
Steve. It was made here by capitalists in the United States, and it had the support of the government. It wasn't the government was trying to stop it. We were facilitating, the government of both political parties was facilitating these efforts overseas. And there's professors like Ron Cox at Florida International University who publishes a wonderful journal called Class, Race, and Corporate Power. He's long made these points, and I think they're important to read. I think they're important. People should be, should look at some of the work that I've done, trying to make this stuff. I mean, one of the things I'm good at is taking a very complex situation and making it where ordinary people can understand it. I don't speak academese, I speak ordinary language. And so people should be looking up, my work and stuff. It's on the internet for free. There's other people that are doing this work as well. I'm not the only one. Certainly, those of us in Lapio, you can watch the webinars that are online. Just put Lapio Lepaio in your browser, and it'll come up right at the top. Click on it, go to our website.
Now that the international operations of the AFL-CIO are being shut down, they're going to go into bankruptcy. What kind of policy, as far as internationalism, should the AFL-CIO have, or will it have? Because it seems like instead of challenging and questioning their real role internationally, they're defending what they've been doing internationally as far as collaborating with corporations and presenting a pro-capitalist ideology internationally in the labor movement.
Well, I think regardless of what you and I may personally think should happen, and I know what we both think. I think the discussion has to be within the labor movement. We've got to open up. We've got to try to find members that will say we want to discuss what's going on in our labor movement within our unions, and have that discussion. And I think hopefully one of the things that will happen is that people will get out of this limited box of just looking at what the Democrats or the Republicans say, because they're not. I mean, one, they're not telling you the truth in a lot of this stuff, and second of all, they're not telling you a lot of what's going on. And so private researchers and private groups like LaPio are trying to bring out the accuracy as much as possible. But don't take our word for it. Look at what we say.
But beyond
research.
beyond that, I mean, for example, the trade war, shouldn't a solidarity center be trying to link up with workers and unions around the world against trade war?
Well, they should be, but they're not, and they're not going to by themselves. That's why I say we have to have this discussion and fight within the labor movement. We've got to stop this labor imperialism, because that's what it is. That's what it's been for 120 years. And it's only going to change. And, the labor movement is a fascinating thing, good and bad. But one of the things that we know is that workers got to be convinced themselves. They talk to each other, whether they're on the line or they're working in this office or that office. We have to make this an issue and get them to bring this issue up and force it within their unions and force it within those who are pro-union, pro-worker. This discussion has to be made. And for example, I just watched a video yesterday of a pretty dynamic woman who just announced she's going to run for the U.S. Senate in Michigan. And she says, well, her name's McMurrow, her last name's McMurrow. I forget her first name, but a really dynamic woman. And she says, well, the Democrats have to look, the Democrats are supporting the U.S. empire. They want the U.S. to dominate. If we're going to address the problems of the American people, we've got to confront the U.S. empire, the idea that U.S. should run the world. We've got to cut down massive military spending. We're spending something like $950 billion a year. That's money that can't go into public services, it can't go into education, can't go into healthcare, can't go into education. The things that Trump is attacking, he's stealing the money from them. He's giving it to the military. And the fact is, we cannot win a war against Russia or China or Iran. But they can't win a war against us. It's stupid. They're just pissing money away and giving it to the defense contractors, and that's got to be confronted. And if the Democrats don't do that, they're going to go down the tube too. And those of us who are not either Republican or Democrat have to force the issue, and we have to do it through education, through getting out and letting people know about all of this that's going on, and say, don't take our word for it. Go do your research. Here's where we found it. See what you can find. If we're wrong, tell us. But people have to do it themselves. They cannot sit on their asses and wait for some great leader of either party to come and bless them, because they ain't going to do it. They're lying through their teeth, both Democrats and Republicans.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for joining us. We've been talking with Kim Scipes, who is a retired professor and been writing about the role of the AFL-CIO international operations for many, many years. So thanks for joining us, Kim.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve.